Hey folks, welcome back to the Becoming series, exploring the deep truths and the principles that will enable you become everything you are created to be and do. So, I want to talk to you about nothing new. That's literally the title of the episode, Nothing New. And what do I mean by that? Um, it's actually an extract from a quote, right? Um, Nothing new under the sun. Now, what relationship does that have to do with our path to becoming? So if you're a Bible scholar or you read the Bible frequently, you may have come across this particular passage. It's in the book of Ecclesiastes. And the book of Ecclesiastes was written by Solomon, who essentially wrote the book almost as a sarcastic commentary, right? Because he had observed certain things in his time as king, and he had come to the conclusion that life itself um, was meaningless. You'd find that you'd find that particular word in the first chapter, that everything was meaningless, right? But he was seeing it drastically because he had observed that people go through life and they're struggling and they're striving and they're trying to do this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, everybody goes to a particular place, and it seems that all that pursuit comes to naught, right? And um, in his conversation, he made this particular observation. He said that what has been will be again. What has what has gone before will come again, because there is nothing new under the sun. In other words, it means that if you suddenly think of something and you're probably hitting yourself that this is a great idea that nobody has ever thought about before in the entire universe, you're actually quite wrong. Right? Now that seems a bit of a downer, but um, it's actually true. Now, when we talk about innovation, for instance, innovation to most of us means that you have come up with something that is totally new, a product that is totally new, an idea that is totally new, a concept that is totally new, that nobody ever has thought about in the annals of history. But that is not necessarily the case, because if we're talking innovation, okay, let's take an example. Um, so I'll ask a question. Why why do you think that the people in the first century, for instance, were not able to build an airplane? Now, if your answer is because they hadn't thought about the idea, well, yeah, sort of. But look at it this way: what what materials make up, what materials go into the composition of a plane? What materials are used when a plane is being built? Now, if you dissect all those materials, you discover that all of these things were actually in the earth all along, right? Whether it was plastic or metal or whatever it was, all of these things were in the earth all along. So it means that the people who started to build airplanes in the 19th century and onward really didn't come across anything new in the real sense of the word. What they did was to combine existing material using a different way of thinking. But that doesn't mean that those things were in there all along. It just meant that they were discovered, right? And they were used in a particular way to come up with something that everybody believes was new. So, to take another example, um, when we talk about the struggle, or when we talk about a struggle, so for instance, the struggle to overthrow oppression or tyranny, right? Uh, those of us in our generation who grew up in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, in recent times would have seen things like the Arab uprising, you know, the people in the Middle East, etc., who have struggled to overcome years and years of tyranny. But that struggle, that spirit to want to break oppression, isn't new. Because if you go through history, you would find out you'd find out that in practically every generation there has been that struggle. So in South Africa, for instance, there was the struggle to overcome apartheid. In the 60s, in the US, there was a struggle to overcome racism against blacks. And if you go all the way back into history, you discover people like Spartacus, the slave who broke the chains of slavery, or who led an army to break the chains of slavery against Roman oppression. So it is not a new idea. It is not a new idea, because one of the qualities of ideas is that ideas don't die. And even though they are submerged in one generation, they eventually re-emerge in another generation. So, what does this have to do with becoming? It means that when you get an idea, when an idea suddenly pops into your head, that doesn't mean that you have um, the privilege of saying that this is my idea and no one else's. Because, but I don't know if this has happened to you. If you have an idea and you just hold on to it and hold on to it and not do anything about it, have you noticed that sometime down the line, some other person comes up with something that is very similar? Have you noticed that? That is simply because nobody has a monopoly on ideas. It's like the universe, whatever you want to call it, the higher power, whatever it is that you want to name it as, sends these things forth. Whoever catches them first and does something about them is usually the person that that idea is attributed to. But if the person gets the idea but doesn't do anything about it, it's going to go into the head of someone else, because that is how ideas are. They're not static. They're not the exclusive preserve of one person alone, right? So when you get an idea, remember that there is nothing new under the sun. And if you examine the idea and you believe that it is worthwhile in your pursuit to becoming who you want to be or who you desire to be, right, then act on it immediately. Don't waste time, right? Because you, you'd be shocked to discover that within a very short period of time, somebody else has come up with that same idea, and you're wondering, I thought of this idea first. How could this guy just come and steal my idea? He didn't steal the idea. It's actually because he didn't do anything about it. So therefore, it had to go to somebody else who was willing and able to immediately act on it. Right? So there is nothing new under the sun. Get an idea that is worthwhile and act on it.